Denis Cyplenkov is one of the strongest human beings on the planet. He was very successful at strongman, strict curling, and of course arm wrestling. And ping pong, which is a strength sport apparently. But Denis is obviously not a normal human being. His arms are bigger than most people's legs, he can do muscle-ups at a super high body weight, and his hands look like baseball mitts. The thickness of Denis's hand gives him the ability to do very useful things like smash walnuts, and also less important things like be a world champion arm wrestler. But the thickness of Denis's hand is actually not the only thing that is unique. The structure and shape of Denis's hand is just different from a normal person. If we look at Denis standing next to Levon Saginashvili, we can see that Levon's hand is a bit longer and Denis's hand looks a bit thicker. But we also see that Denis's thumb attaches significantly lower on his hand than Levon's thumb does. The distance between Denis's thumb and index finger is far greater than that of an average person. Denis's thumb knuckle is also lower than the average person. This may not seem significant, but it can make a big difference on the table. Denis's thumb attaching so low on his hand like this makes it very awkward for his opponent to grip up with him. Here we see Denis Cyplenkov practicing with Zaur Paisalayev. Normally Zaur would be forced to take a much lower grip than he would like to. If Zaur takes a higher grip for a posting style top roll, he will be covering Denis's thumb knuckle, which is not allowed. But in this case, we see Zaur make the tactical decision to just go ahead and totally cover Denis's knuckle. But in a real match, Zaur would be forced to drop his hand height and take a very awkward grip. We've also seen Hermes Gasparini grip up with Denis. We see that Hermes is a bit confused trying to take a grip. It's basically impossible for him to keep his wrist rise engaged for a posting style top roll without covering Denis's thumb knuckle. After this, Hermes said that Denis was the most impressive hand he's ever felt. He said that once you grip up with him, it feels impossible to win. And keep in mind that Hermes has pulled Levon Saginashvili. We see that when Hermes grips up with Levon, Levon's thumb has a normal attachment and his thumb is longer. Hermes is able to take a normal grip without covering Levon's thumb knuckle. Hermes said that it was much more comfortable to grip Levon's hand than to grip Denis's hand. We also saw during Denis's match with John Brzenk that it was difficult for John to do a traditional high knuckle posting top roll. If John took a very high grip, he would have been covering Denis's thumb knuckle. So Denis's thumb makes it very awkward to take a grip, as well as making it nearly impossible to do a traditional high knuckle posting style top roll like we often saw from Travis Bajan. If someone tries to grip Denis very high like Travis does, they are almost guaranteed to be covering his knuckle. Another advantage Denis's thumb gives him is the ability to achieve more depth in the setup. Having more depth means that your hand is further past your opponent's hand. Instead of being palm to palm, your palm is past their palm. This means that your opponent is having to fight your arm closer to the elbow joint or closer to the pivot point. The closer to the pivot point they are, the more leverage you have. This also plays into Denis's favor. This increase in leverage means that Denis's already crazy strong bicep will apply even more back pressure into the match. It also makes it more difficult for Denis's opponent to find Denis's fingertips and attack them. The combination of all these factors make a lot of Denis's matches look a little bit weird. It almost looks like both pullers are forced into doing a low hand top roll. Denis's thick hand makes it difficult for anyone to force a hook on him. And on top of that, they would have to take a lower grip to not cover Denis's thumb knuckle. So they often end up in what I would call a double flop roll. Both athletes' wrist rise and cupping has failed. The anchor point of the match is pronation and back pressure. And good luck having more back pressure than Denis Cyplenkov. Denis also has very good endurance, which works very well with his unique hand that often leads to long drawn out ugly matches. Another advantage Denis has from his hand is inside arm wrestling. If the opponent decides to hook Denis, they will essentially be dad moving him because of the low grip they were forced to take. Although Denis has adopted the top roll as his go-to move lately, we saw in his match versus John Brzenk that he doesn't really fight the hook either. Denis won't necessarily attempt to force his opponent into a hook, but if his opponent wants to hook, he will likely allow it because of the leverage advantage his hand gives him. Another advantage Denis has from his low thumb attachment is the strap setup. Because Denis's thumb is so low on his hand, this allows the top strap to be applied far lower than normal. Again, this gives Denis a leverage advantage. The closer the strap is to the elbow, the better. Overall, I would say Denis's hand is an advantage for him, but this doesn't necessarily mean it always helps him. One problem is that the style Denis generally pulls in leaves him with less than ideal options to finish the match. Both him and his opponent have their wrist cracked back a lot of the time, which basically gives him two options. Option number one is to just sit there forever until his opponent gives up, which to be fair is actually a pretty good option. 99% of people will not have the ability to bleed Denis out. However, both of these options remove Denis's ability to climb and improve his position over time. If Denis's wrist rise and cup fail, he will probably never get them back. And what happens if Denis does have to pull someone who has great endurance? This happened back when Denis pulled Michael Todd. In many ways, Denis and Michael Todd are very similar. They both have a great King's move, they both have great endurance, and they both have a flop press. What we saw in this match is that both guys looked nearly impossible to pin, but they really struggled when trying to finish the match. And pretty much the only option to finish the match was a flop press. Denis did end up winning this match, but it was very back and forth. So Denis's hand structure allows him to pull in a style that is very effective against a lot of people. But ironically, the best style to combat Denis's style could simply be to mirror it. Another disadvantage of Denis's thumb attaching so low on his hand is that it could potentially make him more susceptible to being forced into a hook. Denis's matches often start with a deeper grip, a bit more wrist on wrist instead of palm on palm because of his thumb attachment. This theoretically makes it easier for the match to go inside. But as I said earlier, Denis does not seem to mind going into a hook. So this could be a disadvantage specifically for the style of top rolling, but maybe not a disadvantage for Denis as he seems to be content to go in a hook with most people. Additionally, Denis's hand and wrist being as thick as it is probably offsets this. The thicker your hand and wrist is, the more difficult it will be for your opponent to force you into a hook. So it would still be very, very difficult to force Denis into a hook if he didn't want to go there himself. Looking forward, I think Denis has some very interesting tests coming up. He will likely pull Devin Larratt sometime over this next year. Devin poses somewhat of a mirror threat to Denis as he also has a bleeding defensive open top roll based style. Devin will likely have a hard time finishing the match, but Denis will have the same problem. If Denis manages to defeat Devin, he will have a different challenge and a greater challenge in Levon Saginishvili. Levon may be a better style match for Denis than Devin is, however, Levon is just so powerful. But who knows, maybe Denis's unique hand structure will be just enough to give him the edge over Levon that he needs. And of course, the primary reason Denis is so good at arm wrestling is because he is stronger than almost everyone else. Denis's hand structure is not the primary reason he is so good, it simply gives him a slight edge over his opponents. I'm really looking forward to seeing Denis's upcoming matches over these next couple years. Denis's hand does give him potential advantages over certain pullers on paper, but it will be very interesting to see if these subtle differences end up helping enough to make the difference in these big matches.